everyone, and welcome to the Iron Canon Podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network for in-depth discussion on the lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. I'm glad I remembered that. It can rolls right off the tongue. I'm back. My name is Matthew. I'm coming to you from Underworld North Studio in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's great to be back. Good to have a bit of a break, but I'm here, ready to go, and I am joined, as always, by your friend of mine, Mr. Joel Davis. How are you doing this week, Joel?
I feel like the balance has been restored. No, everything is as it should be. No, I mean I had a great time with last week with all my guests and stuff, and it's just more natural hearing you say the intro than me.
There we go. It rolls again. It rolls off the tongue. But yeah, no, you did a great job holding the ship together, keeping it afloat, keeping it going. You didn't just keep it afloat. You kept it steering, kept the head in a direction. It was sailing. Other nautical metaphors. There we go. This week, let's dive into it. This week, talking about the Jedi. You either love them, you hate them, you don't care about them, but you can't get away from them. Jedi characters are at the heart of the films, which means they're the focus of many a canon novel or comic book run as well. So this week, we're looking at the treatment of the Jedi in paper canon from the High Republic to the Late Republic and beyond. And yeah, join us later on for that in a bit. Oh yeah, I realize this is the first time in a while where I'm on without a guest. So normally this is the time where we'd throw it to a guest. It's like, help us do that. Talk about this Acolyte episode. But no, there's no guest. This is what we're doing right now. But do the plugs off the top at first. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Iron Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. Yeah, check that out. I mean, all the Tractor Beam episodes. I'll get to Tractor Beam in a second. Here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, you can follow us, give us a like, and a subscribe to this video. If you subscribe, of course, you will get the Tractor Beam. You will get the flagship. Oh yeah, that flagship podcast called the Star Wars Underworld.
That cool thing.
That thing. You'll get that. Just notifications for that, etc., etc. Here on the channel, there are YouTube memberships, and then there are super chats. Obviously, any comment we get down below, if it fits in the conversation, we'll try our best to flow it in, to bring it in. If you super chat us, if you give us some Republic credits, some American or Canadian dollars, I guess those are Republic credits, we will definitely bring that comment to the top of the pile. We appreciate any support to the channel and to the network that you can provide. And next up, we got the Discord server. The link down below in the description, minty fresh. Click on that. Come on in. The water's fine. There is an Outlaws spoiler channel. There is a Marvel channel. There's a Star Trek channel, among other things. There's a celebration specific channel coming up. That's coming up in about half a year now. It's exactly half a year. It's a celebration. Dang. That's wild. And the reason I know that is because it's around my birthday, and October is my half birthday. So that's how I know that. So yeah, so join in there. Joel, any events coming up? Any events recently in the Discord?
We had a fun game night last week, so that was great. This week we'll probably go silent, and the week after next we haven't decided yet. So stay tuned for what we decide, probably in the game night.
Sweet. Sounds good. Sounds like fun. How's the kind of the rewatch going, the chronological sort of?
Slow pickings, because we're still on season 1 of Young Jedi Adventures, and we got a whole season 2 to go for.
And then the Acolyte, and then, well, the only potential good thing about the Acolyte being canceled is that you don't have an Acolyte season 2 to worry about in that rewatch. No, there's no silver lining. I don't think that's salvageable. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Hashtag to the Acolyte. In some way, shape, or form. Checking my thoughts on the Tractor Beam for all that. Here's a segue, Matthew. Tractor Beam comics reviews. Wednesdays are for comics. Comics are for Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, right here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, etc. Everywhere else, you get your video podcasts here, Facebook and Twitch as well. Not Twitter, unfortunately. But yeah, Chris Abbott and I go through the comics that came out that day and whatever else about Star Wars we want to talk about. This past week, actually, I'll get to this in a bit. As I think Dom mentioned on this year podcast last Monday, I had a pair of interviews with Rodney Barnes and Mark Guggenheim. Rodney Barnes, of course, wrote Lando Double or Nothing. He's writing, I guess he's probably finished writing it, but the Inquisitor's run. And Mark Guggenheim the D Squad comic, Han and Chewie comic. Yeah, and I popped those into the Tractor Beam episode last
Didn't
week.
he write any of the adaptations of the streaming shows, or am I thinking
Yeah,
somebody else?
he's written the Ahsoka adaptation as well, but
Okay.
we don't do the adaptations on the track. And I
All right.
literally told him in that interview, I asked him a question about that. I literally told him in the interview, yeah, I'm more interested in the original stories too. I think kind of all are. We kind of have opinions. I have opinions on those, which you can watch. Go back and Tractor Beam episodes, old Tractor Beam episodes, and Chris Abbott and I just did our 50th
Nice.
of this iteration, and then so we kept that going and kept that going this past month because comics kept coming out and I talked about stuff somehow. Um, so with this past week, we talked about showed those interviews. So I talked all about Fan Expo Canada, and then Chris talked a bit about Outlaws. I think he's finished it now, so check that out. Check out Tractor Beam. And this coming up this weekend. I have this whole thing right here. Why did I do that? Coming up, so we are talking about comics. We're talking about comics. It's all High Republic this week. The Kalnaka one shot. We're gonna lament, but also enjoy the Kalnaka one shot. Echoes of Fear #1 and High Republic Adventures Crash and Burn one shot. Going back to Corellia, enjoying the adventures of Crash and Xeno and all them. Echoes of Fear that also. More nameless, but why not? That'll be interesting. First Kalnaka. I just seen that Kalnaka there. I'll just say one thing. It was a bit of a flaw in the show that they kind of just didn't use them at all. But except to the end, they did use them at the end. It was interesting in episode 7, flashback episode 7. But it'll be interesting to see them fill out the story in paper canon. It'll be fascinating. Check that out. 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, right here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel and wherever you get your video podcasts, Facebook and Twitch as well. There we go. Hopefully that's better. Yeah, I was having some mic issues with this thing. I don't know. My other mic was better, but
That's
sure,
okay.
it should be better. All right. I think that's about it for plugs. We'll pick up those plugs again at the end. So please do stick around if you missed anything or comment in the comments. We'll pick that up. That's enough about me yammering. We're bringing back this segment because we're not doing Acolyte reviews and whatnot. So figure we have time. This week in Star Wars, our week in Star Wars. So Joel, take her away.
I got a bit of a light week of Star Wars this week. Star Wars Outlaws has been out. I, of course, been watching other people play it because I didn't buy it because I think it's on the PS5. I don't have a PS5. I don't want to buy a PS5 just yet. They're expensive. But for all Paper Cannon fans out there, I am happy to report that Outlaws very much I get a little bit of sun on my eye. Very much depicts the post-Empire, pre-Jedi era of Star Wars storytelling that the comics have so graciously built for us quite well. We got the Syndicate Wars. We got Crimson Dawn. We got I'm not going to spoil it because it's kind of a spoiler, but we got a very interesting tie-in to the comics in a way that was seeded in a while back.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, people. I'm not going to say what it is. Matthew knows what it is. I don't know if Chris knows what it is yet. Does he know what it is yet?
He told me it was the opposite of what you said. So they both could be right. They both could be true at the same time.
I'm
it's
curious.
One of the situations.
I'm curious what he thinks because I don't know what he thinks, but I have seen the cutscenes. But I think I've showed you the cutscenes. But
yeah, I know what you're referring to.
But we got that. We got just a lot of good world building, even stuff from the streaming shows. There's this is not that big a spoiler, so I'll just say there's the Kenobi Gate that they just walk around. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, overall, really interesting to see an era that's been so dominated by the comics told in a different media. And it always kind of makes me wonder, like, moving forward, how we will deal with telling stories that sort of have already been covered in one media in another. It's always kind of a fascinating thing because, it's always one of those weird things to me where, like, I'll just say this a bit candid, and then we don't have to go
Yeah.
into it too much. But just like it's always interesting. People always say, "Oh, we always go back to the original trilogy. We always go back to the original trilogy." I'm like, well, actually, we really just go back to the Dark Times and then the post Endor stuff. The actual original trilogy era of stories, in between 4 and 6, have actually not been on screen that much. It's always been the comics.
Mhm.
Um,
Different
I guess if you consider Dark Times and post Endor OT extensions, fine, okay, sure. But yeah, it's interesting. This is our first real OT era thing that's not been the comics, and it's done a good job representing it. So
Yeah.
if you like Star Wars, go get Outlaws. That's all I can
It's
say.
not counting Battlefront 2. That's after Endor.
That's true.
But yeah. I mean, I gotta say, so pretty much every day, Chris would be messaging me, yeah, this comic reference, that comic reference. It made me feel like this is part and parcel of that crossover, and we know Charles Soule was involved in at least consulting on the story a little bit, maybe just making sure things line up. But there were some cuts in there, deep cuts in there that I was not surprised. I was not expecting a video game to really. I mean,
And then
we
there's the
we
thing I shared with you too.
yeah, and that one you showed too, and it's yeah. I mean, it's cemented to me that video games are paper canon. Like they're especially this one. At least this one is. But I mean, even Fallen Order and Survivor had their references. How Fallen Order had a tie. Sorry. Oh, sorry, had a tie in comic. There was a novel set in between those two. Yeah, this Outlaws, it just feels so part and parcel with that story that's told primarily almost exclusively in comics. Then there's also some aftermath, a little kind of aftermath kind of
Oh,
prequel stuff.
I mean the
um
planet from Aftermath. So yeah.
yeah, they go to Akiva, and there's a little bit there, so I don't want to spoil that. But yeah, and just the way they honor the story that's set down and use it, from what I can gather, use it as a jumping off point to tell its own story, which is what you want to do in paper canon. It's especially how paper canon works, is you take what's being done before and use that as a jumping off point or something to fill in. But here's this lake, and oh, sorry, oh, yeah, there's different moments. And by the way, on that note, Chris and I figured out precisely when this is set, because there is a reference in there. I think this one, should I spoil a little bit about Laws here? Maybe talk about it for a second.
Is it the big one that we talked about, or just the
No,
smallest one?
it's not. It's not. It's one of the
Oh,
ones Chris and I mentioned.
okay.
That there's a bit of dialogue referencing Leia meeting Kira, and
Okay.
we know precisely when that is. That's in issue number 18 of the ongoing run. And that is actually right before, that's sort of this kind of in between War of the Bounty Hunters and Crimson Reign. So that's precisely when this game is set, is between those two moments. And so yeah,
Right.
I mean, and Charles probably was like, yeah, let's do it there, why not, or suggested that, and Sorger may have suggested that, or somebody. But yeah, giving us this kind of moment, because yeah, that is an interesting little gap again in between the two, kind of almost an interlude moment. And when I just a weird example, when I sort my comics here, I was like, okay, I'm going 18, but where's ongoing 19? Oh, I put on going 18 within the whole Crimson saga and War of the Bounty Hunters and Crimson Reign, but then I put 19 back in the ongoing from before, so I've gone from like 12 to 19. That makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but to what I'm talking about. But this is just kind of this time in between crossover moments. So yeah, to actually put in there makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah, I think
and
it's
when
like
things are starting to ramp up, especially with Crimson Reign, and Kira's really starting to set herself up as as this formidable force in the galaxy and in the underworld. And so for this to be set then makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I think this game does a good job of like not making a an era that you could think is oversaturated, because we have so many comics
Mhm.
not feel oversaturated while still building
Yeah.
on those comics. And one more thing before we close off.
Mhm.
Don't worry, prequel fans. There's also lots in here for you as well. There's lots and lots of prequel goodies in this game. So if you're a prequel fan, and especially like the Separatist, I also recommend this game.
Yes.
A lot of fun lore goodies in here for you too.
Yeah, it's from what I check. I admit I only basically the most I know about this game is from whatever Chris sends me, and then like just DMs me, and then reading the synopsis on Wikipedia. Seems interesting. So yeah, all things considered, it's pretty good. A pretty good game, pretty good reception for the most part, I think. So yeah, I think Hannah has her review up on her channel. I haven't watched it yet, but I'll give it a look. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, definitely check out Star Raptor at Star Raptor and YouTube.com for all of Chris's reactions as well. Do you have any more thoughts before we move on?
Nope, I gotta check out Chris's gameplay because I want to see if he's gonna try and just be a Crimson Dawn loyalist and see if he can do it. Because I've heard some people have accidentally screwed up and made them angrier at with the reputation system. So
yeah,
that'll be fun to watch. But no, I'm all good.
yeah, he's been doing a bit of streaming on YouTube, so check that out. A few things very quickly for me. I'm in High Republic. I'm almost caught up because of just I guess this counts as having been caught up if we're in the middle of a book that people are just all in the middle of for the most part. Beware the Nameless by Zoraida Cordova. It's the young readers book, and yeah, I'm enjoying. I'm a little kind of concerned about some of the ways that they're preserving tension in the story. Of course, it's for younger readers, so maybe that works for that age group. I'm really liking the way they've introduced the Nameless through the younger perspective. It's a challenge when these have these kids who need to face these perils, and kind of like in Escape from Valo, similar there. And this definitely carries on a lot from Escape from Valo. So yeah, interesting. Churro the Hut, you get a perspective of a hut, and he's not your usual mob boss. He's a science nerd. He's your
nice
local,
for once.
Yeah, and he's a kid too, so he's like
I hope we get to grow up to be a mob boss. That'd be just sad.
That'd be disappointing. Hopefully, he grows up to be a good science nerd and contributes. Even I can almost see him joining the Republic, and why not? Why can't you have a hut in the Republic? If you have Klingon in the Federation, you have hut in the Republic. Why not?
We had hut chancellors in Legends. Let's do it.
There we go.
So, they were good too. They were good chancellors.
You never know. Infinite diversity, infinite combinations. Wrong franchise, Matthew. Lastly, FedEx Canada burnout withdrawal. I'm like, when is New York Comic Con coming already? Because I really love Fan Expo Canada. It was a lot of fun. Check out my whole rundown again, like as I mentioned on the Tractor Beam this past Wednesday, including those interviews. But yeah, it was just enjoying that con life again. Thanks to Touchwood and Fan Expo Canada for all again for being so what's the word, amenable to everything that all of us content creators do. Whatever content creators with these cons. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to New York. I didn't get a press pass for that one because I just haven't gotten around to that, but definitely I have tickets. Don't worry, I'm going. I'm all set. I got the flight, I got the hostel, everything. So looking forward to that in a month and a half. So check out that coverage there. But yeah, I got so check out my again my interview with interviews with Rodney Barnes and Mark Guggenheim on the Tractor Beam right here on the Underworld Network YouTube channel. And yeah, and anything. We'll see what I cook up for New York Comic Con. See what Chris and I end up doing. Probably something similar maybe to what we did last year. Although last year, yeah, it was kind of streaming or streaming live to in the middle of the Javits Center didn't work because the internet there is terrible. Yeah. But I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really jonesing for it. Yeah, cons. It's New York Comic Con, and it's only a month and a half away. Just a little bit, just over that. So looking forward, and also first, these are the first finally con season without the strikes. And yes, the actors and writers got a deal they can live with. But it'll be nice to go. I think we can all understand and agree with that. It'd be nice to go, and that the actors can all talk about whatever they want. Ewan McGregor not just talking about tea and motorcycles, which was interesting a little bit, I guess, if you like tea and motorcycles and cardigans. But I should probably have a tea after this. But other than that, I'm not. I'd rather hear him talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Is he gonna be at New York Comic Con again?
I don't know if he will be, but it was just funny how last year he was during the strike, so he talked about tea and motorcycles.
I'll guess. Well, you can tell it. They can say stuff now because here's a little Dragon Con little tidbit for you. Natasha
Luberdizo
has stated that Ahsoka season 2 will be filming next year.
Nice. On that note, Manny Jacinto said his life ambition is to have Acolyte season 2. So
will he be at any of the cons this year?
Probably, yeah. I mean, he was at Dragon Con.
Okay.
And he was at D23. That was before the announcement, but yeah. So when we were expecting Acolyte season 2 announcement, I'm still salty about that, guys. If you can't tell, I'm still salty about that. Again, check on Tractor Beam was able to give my thoughts. I understand the logic, Joel. What you were saying, what you've been saying and messaging has made sense. I get it. Okay, then give us some form of story somewhere. That's save the Acolyte. If it's a direct to Disney Plus movie, if it's something theatrical, I don't know.
I mean, want to know my little selfish thing?
What's your little selfish thing?
I want it to be a theatrical movie in theaters, but the only reason I want that is because I feel like that means more Plagueis because they have CGI budget.
Yeah.
Let's face it, TV budget, Plagueis probably not going to be in it for that long, except for this is as much as we can afford. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like Zeb. It's like Zeb in The Mandalorian. It's like, sorry guys, we can only afford like 5 minutes.
Is that why this thing's gonna be a movie? So they can have a movie, Mandalorian Grogu, so they can have a Zeb budget.
I probably doubt that was the real reason, but if that means more Zeb, then sure. Sure. I mean, I think the Filoni thing being a Filoni film probably means good chance of Snoke showing up because Snoke budget.
In Heir to the Jedi is Snoke. I don't know about Snoke.
In the Filoni film, which is Heir to the Empire.
Yeah, Heir to the Empire. Snoke, really? I don't know what Snoke.
He might be around. It's still post Endor.
I mean, I can see something with Project Necromancer, given everything in the Bad Batch, but
I don't know. Just my hunch. It's just like, can you get a full CGI character better in a movie than probably in it?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I get that. I'm just thinking it's gonna be Zeb.
Yeah, it could be Zeb too. I'm sure we'll see Zeb there too.
Zeb in live action Kalos, and visit the family, meeting the parents. All right, fun times. I think that's it for this week in Star Wars. Stay tuned next week. We're gonna have another This Week in Star Wars, and then the week after we're gonna have a really great one. So yeah, looking forward to that. All right, Joel, it's your turn. As you've done so ably over the last month, take it away.
For over 50 generations, 50 years, the Jedi Knights have been the stars of the Star Wars franchise. I'm not going to do Dark Time thing because that's going to sound weird. And they have been depicted in so many ways by so many people, from George to Dave to Claudia Gray to Tim to Charles Soule and whatnot. But are there any thematic through lines of how we depict the Jedi Order? Are there any things we can connect? Let us find out together. All right, so I think the best place to start our discussion about the Jedi Order in paper canon is to first kind of look a little bit broad, and then we can go a little more short. And I think the broadest thing we can look at is the overall thematic point is all things in Star Wars are depicted very much by all things in Star Wars are depicted because of the times they were created in and the people who are making them, who are also affected by the time they were created. Because after all, no art is created in a vacuum. I think that is ultimately the overarching theme here of this discussion. Mm-hmm. And I think we can see that in the history of the Jedi Order depictions throughout this franchise's history, especially in paper canon. So obviously, the the first major depictions of the Jedi Order were actually two things that we did on this channel a couple weeks ago. Were Tales of the Jedi, the comic book series by 1990s by Tom Veitch, which were going off, of course, just the original trilogy in the 90s. And obviously, the 90s had their own, context to them, and because of that, the Jedi had their very own context to them. They were very much guardians of peace and justice, battling against the evil of the dark side, defenders of the light, all that good stuff. You'd like Tales of the Jedi, Matthew. It's very much
I have it. I need to read more of it. I've read about half of it.
You should. It's your cup of tea, I tell you. It's like Jedi, very much like we are the defenders of the light against the dark of the evil and all that stuff. And then the prequels happen. And the prequels, like a lot, change everything. And I think also not just the prequels themselves, but a combination of the prequels and, of course, the context of the 2000s, which I think, again, may change the context of how people view the Jedi Order. Now, again, I've gone on record on saying George Lucas himself may not have viewed the Jedi in the prequels as flawed, but people coming out of those films did, and I think a lot of that is, again, the context of the times they grew in, and when they got their hands on the Star Wars brand, and got to view their story, be they books, Knights of the Old Republic games, etc., they very much influenced their depiction of the Jedi Order. Things got a lot more critical. Jedi actually started to be looked at more as an institution than just, here are some cool space wizards, they're fighting evil space wizards, let's go. And I think that is a trend that we have seen today, very much so. Now, I don't think it's across the board. I think a lot of it also depends on the story that we want to be told, and again, the artists that are telling it. But I do think that context has created context of our times, context of Star Wars itself has created certain through lines in which we can see the depictions of Jedi Order in both paper and screen. But we're going to focus today, of course, on paper. But before I continue, Matthew, do you want to respond to any of what I just said?
Yeah, I think specifically the context you mean. For some reason, I divided in terms of presidencies. I don't know why. Just what kind of era this was. The 90s was Clinton, and everyone was kind of the end of the Cold War, and everything was hopeful and optimistic. And then boom, Bush, and Bush and the war in Iraq and 9/11, and just a loss of confidence in the presidency, a loss of confidence in the goodness of the American experiment, the goodness of American empire, of course. That is really up for debate in this coming November. But it's in the zeitgeist. One of the things that my mind goes to then is, of course we have Newt Gingrich or Newt Gunray and Halle Bertoni and all those, and that's George being George. Also, the role of say specifically the Southern Baptist Convention, evangelicalism, in that in propping up Bush, especially in his war in Iraq, the war in Iraq, even Afghanistan, the axis of evil, that language, of course, comes from Reagan, but he brings it to the center stage. This idea that that we are the servants of the light, the goodness and truth, and the Christian heritage that we've received from America as a Christian nation. And so then there's also a skepticism about that, right? About how that gets used as it's used just by the Republican Party to push votes, to push worldviews, and we still see that, and we see that getting reduced to one or two or three issues in terms of social political issues today. So that is very much in the zeitgeist too when it comes to the Jedi, and how people see them as just allied with this president that they completely disagreed with. Remember, of course, Trump makes Bush look like a Nobel Prize winner, but that skepticism came from there, and so they see that and say, okay, the Jedi, they emphasize the extent to which they were tied into the interests of the Republic, and to the power base of the Republic and the economic base of the Republic. And they say, I mean, this is kind of the whole debate about the prequels, right? Um, are the Jedi complicit? Well, this is the debate that Luke has with Rey on Octo, right? Are the Jedi complicit in the rise of Palpatine, or are they victims of the rise of Palpatine? Of course, the answer is both. But people will emphasize, oh no, they were explicitly at the forefront and seeking it, and that gets picked up in different books and different stories because there's different interpretations. And you could ask, did Leslie Headland, was she going with that interpretation to some extent as well? Maybe. The scenes with Renestra, potentially, but not exclusively. And so
I
that's
won't
all in the
ask in the next
background.
interview.
Yeah. So that's all in the background then when, and this is after, this is good 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, later, after Bush and after after the prequels, 25 years of the prequels. Now we're having all the new paper canon, that canon gets reset. And so they're free to look at Jedi characters, and then of course free to have a whole highfalutin, see what I did there myself, era of publishing initiative that does something completely different. And so
It's interesting that pop culture seems to cycle with the presidential elections. I don't know if that's like intentional or that's just how the world works. It's kind of weird. Um,
it is odd. It's this weird cult of personality, as if one person really does mean the world is going to hell in a handbasket, going to Malachor in a handbasket, or not. And that's a I mean, this is a political tangent here, but that's concerning in itself. And yet things really are at stake this November. So please go out and vote if you can. I can't vote in the presidential election, so please go, not for me, but for yourself.
Also, just thinking about it, it's like, Disney era of Star Wars was
Mhm.
2015 to 2019. So that's all the first Trump administration. Then
Yeah,
it's kind of phase two, which we're kind of coming out of, sort of all of Biden's thing with the streaming era. And
yeah,
depending what happens next, we're kind of entering phase three of the era with movies and Mando and
that's
stuff. So,
true. It's a funny coincidence.
I mean, I've seen it with superheroes too. So I've seen it
Yeah,
with
I mean, there's
Marvel.
also COVID was in there, and yeah,
But anyway, yeah.
yeah.
So
But
I mean, I doubt it. I mean, I think it's probably not just presidential elections. I think
no.
probably something a lot deeper. But I think that's part of it. So you're probably
Mhm.
right.
Well, I guess
Um,
the point I was driving home was Jedi and their relationship to the Republic, and are they complicit or not? I mean, that debate, I think that you've brought up multiple times for good reason, because it does come to the fore with all these books and these authors.
I mean, yeah, like 90s Star Wars, Republic, new and old, was like, we're the Republic, we're the good guys, we're gonna
The
battle the
Federation,
evil. We're gonna battle the evil separatists. Not the separatists. Wrong group. We're gonna evil Sith lords, and it's like there's even a whole thing in the audio drama of Tale of the Jedi where it's like the scene where it's like we're a republic. We have our differences, but we all come together, and then they realize, oh yeah, we do, and then then we're all gonna like, yeah, let's go save the people, and very very heroic and
yeah,
stuff like that. And then the
very
2000s
optimistic.
come along, and then
Yeah.
that changed. That whole thing changes very
Mhm.
much so.
I mean, one last thing I'll say, very similar. I mean, the reason I thought this, very similar thing happens in Star Trek. Very different thing happens in Star Trek, but it also responds to these things, these American political trends. So
I mean, no art is made in a vacuum. All art
exactly.
responds to something.
To your point. To your point.
Exactly. So, like we said, all art responds to something. But I also think that with Star Wars, I think, how do I put this? I think certain eras are better suited for certain times.
Hmm.
And, obviously a lot of it's probably nostalgia to some extent. But I do think maybe, although I have no real proof of this, you could argue we see certain eras emphasized in Star Wars more because of the context of which our times are in,
Mhm.
compared to other eras when they are different. That sounds very well. Okay, so here's what I mean. Here's what I'm thinking, and I have no proof for this. If there was an overemphasis on the original, and I'm gonna say just Dark Times
Yeah.
era, original
The Empire.
trilogy, yeah, in between 2015 to 2019, look at the context of the world and think to
Yeah.
ourselves, why is that? Now, I don't know if that's just pure coincidence or not. I think some of it's also just hey, nostalgia. We gotta make the money.
Yeah.
We make the money. But um, you could also argue that that time period seems very well suited for the era
Mhm.
of which we were in. I mean, Rogue One was a very good movie for 2016 in December. I'll say
Yeah.
that much. Um, then you get to the High Republic. That was
2021.
2021, although that was probably being developed during the previous administration a little bit.
Mhm.
But you gotta wonder if, I mean, artists have some very good clear ones, so. But you gotta wonder if, like, in that early times, like, okay, art, and also you can also argue that we're all so tired, we just want some escapism in our
Yeah.
lives. We just want some heroism.
Mhm.
The High Republic will give us that. Again, I don't think it's one to one because again, the screen stuff is still doing some different stuff. But
Mhm.
that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why that era was being so hyped up at the time. I don't think it completely worked because a lot, even during the prequel era of Star Wars, most of the games were still the far past or the post Endor stuff, so they
Yeah.
weren't really telling post uh, dark time stuff at the time, although that because it wasn't allowed at the time. Although the stories were reflecting a little bit of the Bush era in
Yeah.
terms of like what
I
the
mean,
top.
the films themselves were very clearly,
Oh
as
yeah,
you know.
yeah, in books too, but in some of the books at that time.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if that plays into a role, and when you get more of a specific era, that you get the Jedi being depicted in a very certain way.
Mhm.
Um, Now again, I don't. I think my theory is a little off because I don't think necessarily that they're thinking, oh, this era fits really good for the times. Let's tell a lot of these
Mm.
types of stories in this era because again, they still have to, like, these things take years and years in advance.
Sure.
So you can't really go 2016 happened, green light a bunch of OT stuff because then they'll get if that's the case, then that will be completed by 4 years after that, and who knows what
Yeah.
that was going to be. So I think I'm a little off base there, but it does kind of weirdly
Yeah.
correlate, maybe.
I think at the very least, there's always, a yearning in the moment to tell a certain story and to
Yeah,
hear a certain story. And so, yeah, I mean, Rogue One gets greenlit. Well, Phantom Menace Force Awakens gets greenlit. TF the F the Force the Phantom. Whatever. Homophones, language, words. Anyway, Force
episode
Awakens.
7.
Force Awakens gets greenlit. That's very very close, of course, to the First Order is in the ascendancy. That's very close to New Hope, and then of course Rogue One gets greenlit. That's a close New Hope prequel. You know, Bush. I remember the Trump campaign being all, oh yeah, this is Disney Star Wars gone woke because they're opposing us. We're the Empire. Someone got it. Someone got the memo. But there's still, regardless of whatever the political, not regardless, but um, it is part of the soup. It's part of the mix of what kind of story about critiquing an empire do we want? What you're getting at here, I think, is that
Yeah,
we want to say, but then at the same time, with the High Republic being in development, there is clearly from somewhere a desire to tell a more aspirational story, a more
yeah,
uh,
yeah. There we go.
a more noble, to talk about a more noble, and of course Charles Soule explicitly going back to the moment the presidency was at its height in terms of the popular imagination with Kennedy and Camelot. You called it Camelot. Now, of course, that's about the decline, but the presidency, and I'd say the role of churches in American society was at its height, maybe to some extent. Maybe it was they were both on their way down. It was the zenith right before the plummet. But um, yeah, to go back and tell now again aspirational, inspirational stories of how the world could be, how the people could be, how things ought to be, and what better than it's interesting to say, oh, and we're gonna have the Jedi be the ones to show us this. We're gonna have
Right.
young maybe though. I know we're jumping into the first era here, but gonna have young Jedi who are free to discover who they are and be part of and really have a serious role in taking the adults taking them seriously in confronting this Nile threat and Drengir and now the Nameless and uh, really stepping forward and again we're celebrating that there's that diversity in this common cause and the image of the Force, the celebrating the way people tap into the Force in different ways and envision the Force in different ways, and that was something that they notably said, we're going to do that, in contrast to the late Republic, where it's more, oh yeah, we're all just tapping the Force. It's just, the image of light is the only image we have anymore. Not that it's necessarily a bad image, but you have Avar with the song, and Elzar with the sea, and I don't know, Burry with, of course, the Russia tree, right? So yeah, it's yeah, I as you're saying, it's very much, yeah, calling us forth, calling us to imagine something better.
Yeah, it is interesting how that kind of all works out. Even like again, like you said, Fourth Awakens gets greenlit in 2012,
Mhm.
2013. That's kind of like still early Obama season,
Yeah,
term two. Yeah, Force Awakens 2015 is the story of resurgent
yeah,
fascism. Great irony there, obviously. I doubt J.J. Abrams was thinking that was gonna. I
mm,
don't know what he was thinking that was gonna happen or not. But it's like, well, worked out
yeah,
from a context perspective.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I don't think we can necessarily map on too tightly. I think in
oh no,
that
I don't
case,
think
that
so.
was like TFA was about, we're rebooting the franchise. We're not rebooting, but we want to reinvigorate Star Wars is back, give it the moxie of a massive blockbuster release. Let's give him something like what initially took over the world in 1977.
Although I get true, but it's kind of creepy how
True.
that happened, and then 1 year later we feel like America feels like it had its own Star Killer base incident.
Yeah.
So it just worked out that way sometimes, sadly.
Mhm.
Um, but where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so yeah, but High Republic, again, yeah, High Republic very much is now our let's do the Jedi as aspirational figures storyline, and obviously that's the good era to tell it. And it's 200. Ooh, sorry about the sneeze there.
Yeah.
It's one of those sneezes that doesn't want to come out.
I know what that's like.
Oh, here we go.
There we go. Yeah. Just 200 years before the Phantom Menace is what you're getting at here.
200, 300. You don't
Yeah.
have to worry um about younglings getting killed, and that's why
Mhm.
um talk about depicting the Jedi for a second. It's
Yeah.
also why certain stories I think work better in certain eras. So like Young Jedi Adventures,
Mhm.
that story works so well, being almost I don't know where in the timeline. It's like
It's before
before
phase 1.
before phase one. Although
Yeah.
Starlight Beacon's already open, so
Yeah, so yeah, the dedication of Starlight Beacon. So it's around that, the season 1 is around that main focal point at the beginning of like wave 1, phase 1. So,
right. So
yeah.
you can tell that story with a very young, childish sheen to it, and
Mhm.
not have to worry about getting super dark.
Right.
Because it's like, well, you don't have to worry about, let's tell a kitty story during the dark times and let's show the Empire like they're not sharing the fruit. Um, like you can tell those very light stories and show the Jedi just as kids being kids and good Jedi and stuff like that. Because the era kind of allows for that sort of storytelling to take place.
Sure.
The era allows for very escapist type storytelling to exist. Um, and which I think High Republic was created for, in some sense, for
Mhm.
more escapist storytelling to occur. Um,
Hmm.
in a way that I think Star Wars, well, we can do a whole discussion of this. Like Star Wars
Yeah.
balances realism and escapism, and like
Mhm.
some stories are more escapist, others are more in the realist camp. And I think High Republic, at least early on, was very much in that escapist camp. And because
Yeah.
of that, the Jedi are, you don't have to be as critical about the Jedi as an institution. You can't kind of do that Tales of the Jedi thing of like, the Jedi are mystic warrior monk wizards of the light and they
Mhm.
battle the darkness. And, it's like they're almost like the elves from Middle Earth. Although if you're watching Ring of the Power right now, just say, the elves got their problems.
I need to. I'm behind on that show. I need to watch the first season. No, I finished season 1. I need to watch season 2. I don't know.
Yes,
I will say, here's the thing though, is so Avar in Light of the Jedi, yeah, she is that.
she
She's
looks like an
depicted.
elf a little bit.
She looks like an elf. What makes it what makes her Republic aspirational but not escapist is in one of the ways is Avar grappling with the limits and the problems with being the celebrity. And it makes it actually quite realist in that way. Because that's the thing. I think there's a third one. It is escapist, which is fun and entertaining. There's realist, which is get you to think about just how the world is and get kind of critical about the way the world is now. And then there's aspirational, which is just as realist. It's just not critical, it's hopeful. And I mean Star Wars at its best has been aspirational. I mean, so is Star Trek in its own way. But I mean, it's the funny thing, Star Trek, and we're kind of this again, another tangent. We're tangenting here. Star Trek is being aspirational by positing actually something maybe even seems more like a fantasy, right? The end of capitalism, the end of uh,
Yeah.
the end of national borders, and we're all cooperating. That seems more like
We
a
don't
fantasy.
have money. We don't.
Yeah, I was watching something about that today, and uh, so it's aspirational in that way. Star Wars is aspirational in a more realist way, oddly
Uh,
enough. And so it's say, okay, we're gonna have this Jedi who does this form of kind of battle meditation that ends up keeping keeping this tanker from crashing into this star and destroying its system. Talking about Hetzel and the potential greater disaster that could have happened at Hetzel.
right.
Um, and
I,
then Avar saying, okay, well, I'm actually just a human, just a person. How do I live through this? All these younger characters, Vernestra and Avar, and then we're dealing with the fall of Starlight. So the Jedi in the High Republic, yeah, they're an institution. Yeah, they're a community. They're free, like I said, with the Padawans and young knights are free to actually explore and make mistakes. And again, this is the aspirational thing. It's presenting a community of very high powered young people who are free to actually learn not just skill but wisdom in working its way through, and you learn wisdom in part by reflecting on your failures and your strengths.
no, I agree. Talk about Star Trek. I think Star Trek might get a little, especially now. Star Trek has dropped this, and I think for both drama and because it's a little too silly, where it's like even human beings are like, we do not have arguments anymore. We don't.
Yeah,
We are
they
just
stopped that.
logical. Yeah, like
That was
no,
Roddenberry being too slavish about that, but yeah.
but I'm sure living in a non-capitalist society with probably better resources and healthcare and all that stuff will probably make us somewhat better for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I do believe we can't overcome racism and stuff like that, but we're still gonna have problems. There's some of us are still gonna be jerks.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll ever get that far. But yeah, I think that's why I've always liked Star Wars because like Star Wars can be aspirational, but like now people still got problems. People still argue.
Yeah.
People can be petty. Um, You shouldn't be petty, but it's like it
Heroic
happens.
character, you know.
It happens. It happens. But yeah, and yeah, I think the High Republic very much was created to kind of let the Jedi be what I think everyone's thought they were going to be in the prequel. And, I've talked about how they are, and George people weren't accepting George's vision and stuff like that, blah blah
Mhm.
blah. I think like this is how I've always this is how I think these people the people who defend this put it best. Phantom Menace is the ideal Jedi Order to
Hmm.
George Lucas, and then once they enter the war, that's where things get bad for
Hmm.
them. So what you see in Phantom Menace is not a decline in George's view. That's Jedi being the Jedi.
Yeah.
Uh,
Interesting.
uh,
He'd say that the Republic is in decline, but the Order isn't.
right.
Yeah.
Republic. I think George would say it can be saved until the bitter end, but Palpatine becoming Chancellor is certainly a death nail to that. So made a choice. But yeah. I do think that's what the High Republic represents is sort of that aspirational ideal republic and galaxy on a whole.
Mhm.
And because of that, it allows storytellers to tell stories about a Jedi Order that is aspirational. Until we get to Acolyte. We'll never stop talking about the Acolyte.
Yeah.
Obviously that is kind of the point of. I know we're talking about paper cans, but I think we have to do this up.
Yeah. It's the most paper connected thing we've ever seen on screen.
That's true. Where
But,
um,
yeah.
oop, okay, sorry. Where I mean that's kind of the point. It's like okay, we did the aspirational era of High Republic phases 1 through 3 until that ends. Now we're kind of now it's time to. I mean, I know you talk about how High Republic the beginning and the end. And I don't disagree with you, but I
Mm.
just think maybe the meta narrative might not emphasize that super
Sure.
much compared to Acolyte, which is like, nope, now it's time to kick off.
If
Get
it's the
the
beginning of the end, you don't know that, right? You don't know
right.
that beginning of the end. Sorry, keep going.
Acolyte, on the other hand, is like, nope, time to get to it. Papa Plagueis is staring out of his goon cave, getting ready. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm smelling some decay of Republic. Oh boy. Jedi are covering up, you know, divergences of the Force and whatnot. And I think, I mean, again, that is a context of the artists themselves and their own views. And, has lots of interviews, obviously, and hopefully more to come about Star Wars and the Acolyte and whatnot. And
Mhm.
also, the context of when it was, um, and the context of the world itself. Because as much as for a light, there's the dark, and for an aspirational Jedi Order, there's also Jedi
Yeah.
Order: The Cops, which has been
Mhm.
something that a lot of people have been latching onto since the prequels, quite
Yeah.
frankly. Even George himself, has talked about this Jedi as an
Mhm.
intergalactic police force, but I think in George's mind that was not a bad thing at the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, depictions of the police have definitely changed in especially the last decade, certainly longer, although
Mhm.
you know, we were having the riots in LA since the '90s. Just never
Yeah.
dealt with them. So at the time, now we really were dealing with them with stuff with Black Lives Matter and stuff. It's sort of died down a little bit, at least on the activism side, but it's still there to a certain
Mhm.
extent in terms of the portrayals. And I think the Jedi get caught up in that.
Yeah.
And I think Acolyte's very much in
Mhm.
that camp of being a story that wants to be more critical of the institution of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And that, of course, kind of leads into more modern day prequel storytelling, if not the prequels themselves, but prequels by other people, like
Yeah.
Living Force.
I mean, what's fascinating about the Acolyte
Ow.
is it does. Yeah. I mean, so we talk about the beginning of the end. This is the middle of the end. It's really is kind of what you were predicting. It would be this hinge point where there are things that look back to the High Republic. They are right and I don't just mean the I don't just mean the robes. I mean kind of mean those two, but really, I mean in that episode 7 flashback, the council is acting with all the wisdom and temperance that they would have 100 years before. The High
Mhm.
Council is right. It just for Nestra is. I mean, that's the funny thing is she's in a very different role, and so at 100 years before she's this prodigy who is trying to find her feet and trying to realize she doesn't have it all together because she let Starlight fall and Imri everything with Imri. 100 years later, she's in this kind of secret service. Here's another. I should have like a Star Trek reference count.
I like just administration. She's in administration.
She's administration. I think she's Section 31, kind of trying to defend the Jedi from itself. She thinks she is.
At least she reports to Yoda, so it's like he reports to somebody.
But it's this thing underneath the council that is undermining its moral authority.
Except Yoda. So Yoda is in the know. So
we don't know what she says to Yoda because the thing got canceled. So who knows? But
that's true. I'm gonna head canon that Yoda knows though, because he's Yoda.
Yeah. You probably figured it out anyway. But yeah, it does. It paints a far more complex picture than either aspirational or cynical. It has aspirational or heroic elements. The Jedi are heroic. Yord and Jeki, Yord Horde, Yord. I can't point. There we go. There he is.
Yord.
He's a goof. He's comic relief, but if he grows up, if he has the chance to grow up,
he had the chance to grow.
That's what I mean. If he had the chance to grow up, he would have been as noble and aspirational, and as himself as the High Republic. I think Jeki would have too. It's just that I don't know. I forget who was talking about this, but need to get these characters off the board so that Osha could let the past die and move on to the Sith. And so it does. It's very much a both end picture, and that's probably what people struggle with the most. Is it doesn't come down on either side. That's why I loved it. Again, at episode 3, I keep talking about that episode because it just keeps being amazing to me. And so the Jedi are transitioning from these genuine peacekeepers, prudent peacekeepers, into this kind of was an encroaching police force. That complexity, like I think as you're going to get into, that does continue, and you've mentioned it with George, continues into the late Republic.
Right. I mean we can argue we've retroactively now made it, because I always like to talk about George's intent versus what we have today. But in terms of what we have today, retroactively we're in the late Republic, and the Jedi Order on the somewhat decline. It's interesting. I feel like you probably have a better grasp on what the story. I mean, okay, so Living Force to me is very much a Jedi Order story, hands down. Can't complain. Can't argue against that. That's very much a story about the Jedi Order, the Council. Critical, but not defeating. Certainly, I was always very impressed by John Jackson Miller's. I was very impressed by how nuanced he made the Council, and very surprised by how individually, he doesn't make them the Council, they all suck, and that's why the Jedi Order died, because they all suck. It's like even Mace Windu, who I think who I have a whole thing about how I think we are overly critical of Mace Windu. I think people are way too harsh on him, quite frankly. It's like, I think Qui-Gon's right. I think we gotta get off our butts and do something. And then Yoda's like, yes, butts we must get off. I'm
trying to laugh like Yoda there. I knew it. I
tried. They actually try to do stuff on the planet to the best of their abilities. So that's very much a Jedi Order story. I think in some ways it's kind of, I actually consider Living Force to be the true final High Republic story, the final breath of that legacy before we enter Phantom Menace. It just feels like it to me. Just kind of reading like it's sort of like an unofficial, true epilogue of the High Republic. I mean, the base was made during the High Republic era, so there's one connection there. but also just the spirit that the Jedi Council is living on. Just getting down there, trying to help out, even though you know
Mm.
things are going to get really bad, but they're trying to individually at least do something. Although like the question of like can you individually do something but not systematically change the
Right.
institutions? It's ultimately going to be their downfall. Um, but they tried, and it was very much their last gasp almost for that kind of spirit of community
Yeah.
before Palpatine comes in and wrecks house. And the Clone Wars wreck house.
Mhm.
Others like Master and Apprentice, Dooku. I haven't read the Dooku, and I kind of don't remember much about Master and Apprentice.
That's okay.
And Obi-Wan. I mean, I remember some of them having moments of talking about the Jedi, but I always felt that was more just Obi-Wan trying to figure out, is this Qui-Gon guy really for me? I always felt that was more of a personal story. Dooku I didn't read, so maybe there was more to that.
Mm.
Obviously Dooku does eventually leave to be the account again, so he's definitely got to have some issues.
Mhm.
Although I think Tales of the Jedi, the mini series, maybe goes into that a little deeper. Obviously the young Jed, and then obviously the young Kenobi story is kind of more just Kenobi just try to be a young kid and find his place among a bunch of young kids, and then
Mhm.
befriends Dex and goes back. But
Right. Yeah.
so I think Living Force to me is the most heavy hitting of the stories about the
Yeah.
Jedi Order out of all the books of that kind of Phantom Menace era
Mhm.
storytelling.
It's definitely the one that's most consciously about what the Jedi are at this time.
Yeah.
And one thing to note, interestingly, so the first reference to the phrase "High Republic," the first time we hear it, it's in Dooku Jedi Lost. It's also where we hear about this Master Trennis who left the Order. But that's another story. Dooku Jedi Lost. But thinking about the Living Force, so at this time, historians are calling the era from 100 to 200 to 350 years ago. They're calling that the High Republic. They're naming that as there's something that was characteristic about that time that we talked about, the communal, the genuine partnership with the Republic, for the greater good of the galaxy. This aspirational, realistic but aspirational, uh, addressing this Nihil threat, the great works, and that's the Quen is one of the great works, just like Starlight Beacon, like the refurbishing of Quen, making it habitable, um, all that. So the Living Force, then in the Living Force, Qui-Gon calls them to get off their butts, like you say, and the council, they recognize, oh, here's an opportunity for us to actually go back to what made the Jedi great of that era of 200 years ago, to be more present when we had all these outposts all over the place, and we're able to really respond and really be part of communities. Like, you even see Indara at the noodle shop there. She's a regular at the noodle shop because that's what Jedi did. They were able to be regulars in the towns and places they were. Like the Jedi and Val, this is going back a little bit, but Escape from Valo and Ram Jamaram, and them, they feel like they're part of Valo and part of that society, and the relationship on Takodana between Maz's castle and the temple, and
Mhm.
those local connections. In Living Force, they've realized, oh, we've lost that because we're all, especially the council, we're all in the temple, and there's this great retreat, this gradual, uh, closing of all of these temples and consolidating into the temple in Coruscant, and something that the Senate is kind of, asked us to do, wants us to do. Um, Little did they know that's also part of Palpatine's plan to get the Jedi to be out of touch. It's fascinating, the way and this is kind of the answer. The way Palpatine, this is the answer to how are the Jedi complicit in Palpatine's rise. The way Palpatine defeats the Jedi isn't by, yes, turning them into the soldiers in the Clone Wars and the generals in the Clone Wars, but not by making them villains. He doesn't say, I'm gonna make them fall to the dark side in that way. It's that the Jedi, they're just simply going to be preoccupied with other matters, with the why, how many angels Viego can dance on the head of a pin, speculating on those things, on the mysteries of the Force and what.
Preoccupied with an army attacking a bunch of planets too.
Well, ultimately, yes, the ultimate with the Clone Wars, right? But also just occupied with the Council, especially occupied with these large scale trillions of beings. We're dealing with all that, and that you lose the personal connection there to the galaxy, especially. That's the thing. Those temples, they were, like I was saying with Thundara, like I was saying, with Bell and Porter Engle at the beginning of Light of the Jedi, on that planet. I think I forget what it's called, but the planet where where Porter's making soup, and he's good at it that time because he's learned how to. Anyway, on these planets, at least the Council had a conduit for those who had that human connection, not just human, but that personal connection with people out in the galaxy, and that the Jedi people had a sense that the Jedi were there for them. Now they don't, and that's the thing is that the is that the Council recognizes that and feels that, and they just have no sense of how ordinary people live, but they want to, and that's the thing. They want to actually know. They see the wisdom in what Qui-Gon is saying, is calling them to. They see that and say, "Oh, we should go. We should go figure this out, and at least help this one thing." Maybe I think with Qui-Gon, it's in the hopes that that'll be transformative for the Order. But clearly, again, even in Living Force, there's the moment where Palpatine is pulling the strings, kind of almost a mid-credit scene, if you will, but not quite. But you know what I mean.
Right.
And so it's
also
really again complexifying the picture in terms of just are they the villains, are they heroes, are they whatever? They're just trying to figure it out. But
I think ultimately they are still heroes. I don't think anyone who says the Jedi are villains are. I think that's just wrong.
Sure. But also to say them, they're just at this point kind of just too far gone and too. They actually do have too much. The Council does have too much responsibility. It's just that they haven't delegated the responsibility for what we'll call in church called pastoral care, for the personal connection to knights and Padawans on the ground in these temples.
Speaking of pastoral care, because we talked a lot about in-universe stuff. No. It's actually a good segue point. Of we talk a lot about the in-universe. I want to kind of switch back a little bit to the out-of-universe for just a hot second, because again, it's not like these authors are choosing to write these Jedi in a certain way. These are human choices being made.
Yes.
And I like examining the reason as to why. How did we get here? Why is this the case? I do think that my hot take is, the hot take of some of the Jedi defenders has always been people did not like the depictions of the Jedi Order because again they had a very different idea of what they had in their head as kids, and obviously but also I think that. I think there is something that a lot of, especially, let's face it, Western white authors, are just authors, authors who aren't, steeped in like the Buddhism thing that George was into and stuff like that. Or, even from the kind of more of the kind of, or even the Catholic thing, Christian Catholic thing, there is a sense of, it's hard to make these people like people because they don't feel like people, which, that's a bit insulting to like monks and priests because they're people too. But, it's like, I think here's a great example. You talk about, hanging out in the soup. I think people still like Obi-Wan Kenobi are those moments where it's like, he goes to Dex's diner. Look at it. He's just like, here's my buddy Dex. Hello, Dex. And Dex is, your typical diner.
Yeah.
You got the grease like, hey, Kenobi, my pal, take a seat. What you want, burger? And, just Kenobi sitting at the diner talking to his buddy Dex. That's a very relatable moment. And I think, when people look at the prequels in particular, outside of maybe like, hey, Mace Windu should be a badass because Sam Jackson, we all know Sam Jackson could be of that, he's tired of leading Sith Lords. Most of the Council just sit here and talk very stoically, and we must
Yeah.
contemplate the Force. Qui-Gon's got a little bit of that Liam Neeson charisma and stuff like that, but it's like everyone else is like, who's going to sit there? So I think they almost are
Yeah.
projecting a little bit of that. Are they even people? Do they even feel?
Yeah.
It's unfair, and I think that's why I like John Jackson Miller's book, because it's like, oh no, these people are still people. They're just
Mhm.
very bogged down in their work, sadly, and they kind of
Yeah.
lose their touch. But I think also that's where it comes from, where I think it's sort of like, you look at Buddhist monks or Catholic priests, I know especially Catholic priests, and it's like bunch of old dudes in weird robes. You don't think they eat a pizza you know, or go out to the local bar. They're just probably in their fancy mansions praying and doing stuff and
Yeah.
boring. And that's why Pope Francis was such a breath of fresh air for so
Yeah.
many, because he felt like, hey, he's looking like a living person. He
He
likes to have
talks like a
fun.
real person. Yeah.
He likes to look like he has fun.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a great point. I mean, what the word you're getting there is relatable.
right.
Right. Is like, do they talk like a real person? I think about, I kind of evaluate bishops based on how well they talk like a real person. Because, and this is actually a similar point, there's this, I think this is relatable. I think this connects in. I can tie this in.
Okay, go ahead.
But, thinking about my day job and thinking about just the what I'm doing on Sundays as well. There's uh long-standing pressure for church leaders to take on the model of a CEO, because I mean there's a lot of complex,
He's a
wide
business kind
ranging,
of.
yeah, and there is definitely a business aspect to these institutions for sure. It's $1 million budgets, large property, lots of people. um
I'm sorry, but
different
Yoda is the longest serving CEO of the Jedi Order, maybe?
So what I'm getting at though is, there, and this is something I definitely, think about a lot actually, is, there's leadership that takes the CEO skills as just tools in the toolkit that are necessary tools in the toolkit. How to manage budgets and how to craft messages. I mean, this is in communications, right? How to craft a message that will actually communicate clearly what people are need to hear and need to know. There's and I do think about the communications aspect of this because again, my day job, career, but you know that communication, like CEO, like you see a CEO talking, right? That can either come across as definitely very relatable and able to connect with what ordinary people care about. There's a skill in that. I think Taylor Swift, for example, is the master in. She's a CEO billionaire who can connect with everyone. Versus, you think about again, Elon Musk talking about firing workers, whatever, or just not even that, but in the way politicians talk, the way the high level leaders talk in a very crisp, polished way that just sounds like talking pointies.
And then you got Tim
Ver
Waltz. Who
Yeah, exactly, that's a great example. He's very focused and relatable, and not the typical mold, right? I think one of the things we see with the High Council, and that I mean, even this is even in the High Republic era to some extent, but it's more pronounced in the late Republic, is that they're taken to these very vague platitudes. Like with the Marquez sisters, right? These vague platitudes about why their mother died. You know, I talk about pastoral care, right? Being out of touch. This is Luminar and Dooley. She should know better, right? Luminar.
Mhm.
But even she's taken in by the very corporatist speak of the Jedi, and so it's not that they mean well. They mean well, but there's something about again what Pope Francis talked about, smelling like the sheep, right? So and I love that that Master Apprentice, or not Master Apprentice, Living Force really goes there and says, okay, yeah, coming off again. I think with Qui-Gon, there could have been a hope. Like you said, Qui-Gon's one of those who just doesn't care about the corporate speak. He's going to go in. Now there is still nothing. We're not here to here to free slaves, because he is focused on this mission. Again, it's a problem of the lack of. I mean, that's the thing, is this retreat of the temples. That I do think the Nile have something to do with it. I think the Guardian protocols just kick this off a little bit. I still think that, but
it's a slow process, I think, than maybe you and I originally thought. I'll say.
Yeah, sure, I'll grant that, but I think this is only, again, yes, the High Council, they're going to have responsibilities affecting trillions of people, and they're going to have to craft a message that connects with trillions of people. But they can have the quote unquote parish priests on the ground actually meeting and literally sitting with and crying with people and connecting, talking to them, and knowing what they're thinking on a Sunday, and what you're preaching on a Sunday. So again, I'm bringing that message in. It's as if there's no parishes left. Can you imagine? Imagine that. It's just this institution. So
sorry.
So yeah, I will say, here's a thing about age. This is an interesting thing about age. What I've noticed. And I do wonder. I'm trying to think. I wonder if High Republic especially brings this out. It's younger clergy who tend to be more crisp and polished, and it's older clergy who tend to be more relaxed and just more relatable for some reason. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. You make me think again of Yoda, because we're talking about CEO. Like,
sure.
Who's CEO of the Jedi? Yoda.
No.
It's interesting because I think, we talked about, Chris and whatnot, but it's also, put on my little lefty hat here. It's a little classist in some way. I mean, again, if you say, I don't know much about Taylor Swift, but I'll take your word for it. Taylor Swift, she's a billionaire, but she's still got her wits about her in terms of communicating and being able to at least feel relatable.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I think it's like, how can you pull it off, right? Like, Elon Musk can't pull it off anymore. Never really could. Bob Iger can't really pull it off, but I don't think he's that. But I think he's a little bit more. He's more like a typical politician. I think he's very. He can, he's good at it. Sort of like, I think he's just good at communicating. Like,
except during the things he said during the strike were completely bonkers. But anyway,
I mean, even I doubt Obama has done a day's worth of shopping in his life, at least in the last couple decades.
Sure.
I mean, it's. I don't know if you've ever seen this like old like thing of George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, like going to the groceries and like having no idea what a cash register is. Yeah. So that's how I touch. But to go back to Yoda, and then we can transition to Dark Times. Yoda is interesting because I think a lot of it also depends on the authors themselves and where they're coming from and their biases. Because, like, I think people will have very much a bias of Priest Jedi bad. Don't want to think about it. While Yoda, but when you get more nuanced stuff, but with Yoda, I think what's weird about Yoda is that depending on the author, I think Yoda can still, even when he's the CEO of the Jedi Order, the Pope, he can still kind of be very relatable and very wise and still very, very much the Yoda we all know and love. But I also think that, and this is why people, fell in love with Yoda at the beginning, he was the most relatable when he was in Dagobah in a little mud hole, being a little kooky gremlin, and then of course becoming, wise Yoda, wisdom he gives. Yes. And I do think it's kind of interesting, again, kind of seeing relatable Jedi or the unrelatable Jedi become relatable once they lose everything and then go into exile, like Obi-Wan. Although Obi-Wan kind of always kept sort of that relatability. But you had more to say.
Well, Obi-Wan did. I mean, so I just wanted to pick up on
go ahead.
On these other novels, and you mentioned they don't explicitly talk about who the Jedi are as directly as Living Force does, but the thing about Dooku Jedi Lost, which is, the audio play, but by Kevin Scott, Padawan, who's that by Beth Revis, I want to say, Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray and Brotherhood by Mike Chen. These are all, like you said, more character-driven stories. They do show that, like in the High Republic, so things have continued. Some things have continued, right? There are family relations within the Jedi. I think at this point they're more intense, or at least this is what the stories they pick up on. Mike Chen's novel literally called Brotherhood, and of course that comes straight from the films, right, of Obi-Wan and Anakin, and that bond. But that bond is within this environment of, you know, my loyalty is to the Republic, to democracy. My loyalty to the Jedi family. If if in Revenge of the Sith, the tension is with Anakin between his Jedi family and Padme and his child or children, to be born. With Dooku, for example, I mean there's a real tug here. In showing his upbringing, at least his relationship with Sifo, the way, and I'll get to that in a minute, but the way in which his diary at least fondly remembers his master, remembers Yoda, remembers the other masters in the temple. Um, you know, More or less, there's a real tension between the interests about his competing families. Now, of course, for Dooku, it's not that he loves like his father was a piece of work. He loved his sister, I think. Um, there isn't that detachment that the Jedi preach, oddly enough. And so that my point being there that uh, there are these family bonds within the order that they still have. I did mention training younglings, so you have with uh with Dooku, and Sifo-Dyas, there's some question here. Is things are so. I guess here's my point: is it does raise a question. Yeah, they do remember them fondly. Dooku remembers his time with Sifo-Dyas and the training somewhat fondly, especially with Yoda. But how seriously do the masters take Sifo's visions? What the point here is, something has changed since the High Republic. It's not like training younglings and Padawans is about mass producing carbon copies. That's what Kamino's for, right? But Qui-Gon and Anakin in Master and Apprentice, with the whole thing about is Qui-Gon training Obi-Wan effectively enough, or am I creating a carbon copy of myself? What are my worries here? What are my responsibilities? And Anakin with Mill, the youngling that he just runs into in the temple and takes on this journey in Brotherhood. They're both Qui-Gon and Anakin are concerned to ensure that Obi-Wan and Mill are respected, and that the way they're different, the way they stand out.
They are what they grow beyond.
So, well, my point being there, Obi-Wan and Mill are that the way they're different and unique is a feature, not a bug. Right. That's something that High Republic is really strong and consistent on. High Republic Jedi are generally consistent on. In Master and Apprentice, in Brotherhood, it's something that I think Qui-Gon and Anakin are pushing against, is this lack of, or push against at least pressures to conform, pressures to just see the Force as the light, right? That's the only image they have at this point. These pressures that were nowhere near as pronounced as during the High Republic. So that thing, and the thing it says about the Jedi then is overall, there's a pressure for, a common cause, common order, that even Qui-Gon himself, of course, his whole thing, bristling against the way even the council really does take a sterner eye to people who step out and question things, and especially if they're a little younger. I mean, we know, for example, Vern with her light whip, she was concerned when she's a young knight, oh, this is going to get me in trouble, and it doesn't. Maybe by the time of the late Republic, it would have. It's possible.
I I feel like
So
we don't see an. I was gonna say I feel like we don't see enough Padawan master dynamics outside of our main characters. I mean, I guess the closest one that
No.
comes to this example is I guess not Adigalia, Barris and her master,
Luminara, yeah.
who are kind of like a little Narva a little bit. And,
Yeah.
but we all know how that went down.
Yeah.
That didn't go down
But
very well.
that could be the point. Did Luminara, I mean, we know oh gosh, not Pentards. What's the species? What's Mirialans? Mirialans like to take other Mirialans as Padawans, usually. Was that a bit of a what was Luminara trying to press Barris into being a copy of herself?
Maybe.
And that's partly what pushed Barris over the edge.
Yeah.
We don't know. You're right. We don't have a we have very small sample size here.
And the only other ones I can think of are Caden and Master Balaba, and obviously Cal and his master. But there's not those are almost two unique circumstances because they were in the war, and obviously they didn't have time to complete the training. So, I guess that's a good segue to Dark Times.
Well, just one last thing.
Go ahead.
I want to say, because again, there's another aspect of the Jedi. I mean, this kind of gets at the out of touch. This comes back to the out of touch, and in touch. You know that there are, being more distant from the rest of the galaxy at this point. There are these conscious and unconscious biases about their role as the Guardians of Peace and Justice. Do they have maybe a bit of a messiah complex? You know, is there a sense of they're here to save the plebeians from themselves a little bit? That does come up a little bit in High Republic. You know, there's that moment in Fallen Star where Elzar and Stellan try to figure it out on their own. Try to get it off Starlight on their own. It's going down, and Bell is all okay. Well, we got all these mechanics and other civilians right here. Let's get their help. That comes out to the fore when it comes to dealing with the Nameless. So, they're much more cooperation with the RDC than we have in the late Republic, where in Brotherhood, even it's separatists, but they're Neimoidians. There's these attitudes against Neimoidians that the Republic just has unconsciously. Jedi have unconsciously. Maybe in Master and Apprentice, is there too high of a premium on corporations on Cherka? Are they seen as too benevolent? And Princess Fanry, do we kind of underestimating her? Is that kind of the Jedi? Even Qui-Gon saying, "Oh yeah, this corporation, it's been around for a couple centuries, but it's fine, it's okay." But turns out, not okay. And Fanry again bristling against that and turning into this revolutionary.
I like moments like that because I just think it reminds us that I think some. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but I just want to be brought up. It's like I think some of us in the fandom, especially some of us who are kind of a little too anti-Jedi, put Qui-Gon a little too high on the. He was above it all. He had the right way. Like, no, Qui-Gon still was very much of the Order. I think I'm kind of the hot take. I think he was more loyal to the Order than I think even people who say he was the rebel give us credit for.
He was within the institution. I mean, and again, he's complex. He's both. It's fascinating. Right. Again, I go back to the Phantom Menace screening in May, and he's sitting at the table with Shmi, and he's all, "We're not here to free slaves." And everybody starts laughing. It's so ridiculous. Of course you should go free slaves. But he's focused on the mission. He's got the mission to protect the Queen from the Council. So yeah, it
the Council informed. They can't use soul.
I think part of what I mean with Qui-Gon, this is again a bit more of a tangent. Qui-Gon and the Acolyte, and this whole conversation about the Jedi in the late Republic, we just reduce narratives too quickly.
Oh yeah,
and, reduce people. I mean, that's the thing. Our brains. I mean, this is what I'm getting at with episode 3 and polarization. our brains need to categorize things and tell things, both categorize things and tell things in terms of story and a narrative. And so we tend to land in categories and land in narratives. And yes, I think by and large, Qui-Gon has this prophetic role uh, to call the Jedi back to the High Republic, to call them to forward to being who they truly can be. But yeah, he's not a revolutionary in the same way.
He's
He's
not
not
about
a,
burning down the temple.
no. That was Barris. I mean, that's the thing. Barris. When Barris tries that, it's a dark side story. She becomes an inquisitor for half a minute.
Right.
So
And no, I won't go into my candid of how I think Qui-Gon would have participated in the Clone Wars even reluctantly, but I don't get into that. But yeah. That's it. I'll get into that another day. But yeah. Like, where were we? We went to Qui-Gon. Back up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shoot! I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
I will go to Dark Times if I think about it. I'll come back to me. So then we get to the Dark Times era, of course, and I think people, artists, writers like this era in particular, kind of because it's easy. Maybe that's a little harsh. I think that's a little too harsh. It's easy. There's just a bit of nostalgia too, and also again the context of the times. Sometimes when certain presidents are in power, I think we all kind of need a Dark Times Rebels story just to make us feel good. But also to go back to the easy thing a little bit, I think this is also where the Jedi can be written, at least to these authors who have this perspective, a lot more relatable. Because ultimately, and let's just include the original trilogy. So, Dark Times, the original trilogy, kind of all one thing to me, to a certain extent. This is where we can have our Lukes, our Obi-Wans in the desert, our Kanan and Cals. They're not living in a high-rise temple, being monks. Who can't marry. Even though George is 100% okay with no Jedi marriage rule, he actually very much said this is what needs to happen. But again, I think for especially a lot of Western writers, again, it's all a factor of relatability and not people who can't marry or be in relationships and have families. It just doesn't come off as relatable. It's like that's why it's like I think people want the Jedi to be more like classical superheroes, like Superman, Batman, all that stuff. And there are stories where Superman has a family and can be happy. That's we want Spider-Man to be happy and to stay with Mary Jane and not have her die or get divorced, like in the comics right now. It's sad. It's like Superman. He's got Lois. We love the relationship between Superman and Lois Lane. And in the Dark Times, we can tell the stories of Kanan, and that's why I think there's a perception of like Kanan a better Jedi than Qui-Gon, or like what the Jedi should be by again those fans like to reduce those narratives because it's sort of like he can be Jedi, but I also can have be married to Hera, space married. Have his little family on the Ghost, have an actual family that he doesn't get to see with Jason Syndulla. With Cal, it's very much with Marin, what they got going on, maybe not, and his family. What's interesting about the stories, I've actually not read the Caden storybook a little bit. It is about being a Jedi. But it's again, I think more in a personal way. It's sort of about just dealing with the trauma of Order 66. Like I think Fallen Order and Caden's story is a bit more looking back at the Jedi Order a little bit. This might be a hot take. This is a screen story, but I got to talk about it. I don't actually think Kenobi's about the Jedi Order. I think Kenobi is just more mad at himself. It's very much the Last Jedi situation of he's not like the Jedi Order with a flawed institution. Like, no, he blames himself for Anakin. He blames no, it's my fault. Me, it's all about me. And by the end, it's like, okay, Anakin also is responsible for his own choices. I gotta get back on my Jedi horse. Qui-Gon's there. We gotta go learn to be Force Ghost now. Off we go.
Yeah.
Jedi gotta let keep going. So it's that era is all about trauma and kind of trying to learn what to do in this new era
Mhm.
of the dark time. But what do you want to add to the dark times?
I mean, first of all, with Kenobi, that's not a hot take. That is the story. is,
I,
is
I,
saying letting go of Anakin and switching to Luke, transitioning to Luke. This was one of my favorite. This continues to be one of my favorite questions. What do we do? What do we do now? So it's personal, sure, but it's personal for people who found their identity in this community, in this order, in this thing that had this role in the galaxy, hundreds of thousands throughout the galaxy, and now it's gone. Now they're dead. I'm on the run. Um, it's illegal for me. Um, what do we do? Who can I be? Who should I be?
I have no community. They're all being hunted.
I'm being hunted. Who can I find a family now? Can I go and do things? Can I go? We'll go fall in love. Go find, you know, a crew. Um, what kind of moral standards should I uphold? Can I pick up this uncivilized weapon that points it and fires these pew pew things, or do I have to keep using my lightsaber, or can I use my lightsaber because it's illegal and I'll be found out? All these things that they're things that they're so tied to.
Do I
Can,
reforge the Jedi Order single army kind of
yeah.
deal?
Do we pull a Jocasta New and try to reforge the order? That's also shoot. I'm gonna put in the notes here. Darth Vader 2017. It's an example. Jocasta New trying to reform the order, um, or with Cal in Jedi Fallen Order. So no question. But can I even tap into the Force? Is that dangerous? Kind of like, a little bit like the Nameless, but now it's, oh no, the was going to see this thing that was so much. So it's personal, but personal because these communal things were so much a part of who they were. We see Ahsoka, for example, and we see her, especially in Clone Wars season 7 Rebels, but even in the novel by E.K. Johnston, that she decides to continue to go, and she's left the order before all of this went down, but she still contains within herself the direction and vision of the Jedi
The
to go
Jedi
out and
philosophy is like an itch, at least according to the Grand Inquisitor.
yeah,
They cannot help it.
exactly, and we see that even in the novel where she helps these sisters on this farm. Um, Tensu Run, so Inquisitors, I was chatting with Rodney Barnes, and I asked him, should I be worried about Tensu Run? And I think I mentioned this on Wednesday too. So first of all, it's interesting. He's a Jedi who's been hidden by this group, these farmers, and the Inquisitors and come in, and I think they end up burning the village trying to find him, or he lies and gets them out, or something. He's compromising his morals, and so to the point where he's kind of ruthless with uh, this banking clan or Commerce Guild pilots. Um, kind of can't leave any witnesses. So I asked Rodney Barnes, should I be worried about him? He was all, yeah, you should be worried about any Jedi in order after Order 66 that could die. I'm worried about Tensu's moral standards. Is he gonna let them go because he has to do what he has to do to survive? And it's this fascinating question of what does it mean to serve the light when what's at stake is survival. And so that I always found really fascinating. One thing, you mentioned the celibacy thing. Again, I think that's a good example of why it made sense during the High Republic and Late Republic. It doesn't make sense in the Empire. There's no family. You have to have a family. One thing I found interesting, we don't know about Tensu, um, But definitely with Kanan, we know what happens with Kanan to some extent with Cal, especially in Survivor, where connecting with the path. And at the end of the Ahsoka novel, Bail Organa comes in, right? And we know again into Rebels what happens there. A lot of these Order 66 survivors, they end up having some connection to the emerging rebellion, like the itch. They can't help but or scratch it. Or to quote Qui-Gon in Master and Apprentice, that even in the darkest times, when it looks like the light is losing, uh, even the Jedi, they follow the light because it's the light. And so what we've gotten are these stories of Jedi who continue. I mean, Luke. I mean, Obi-Wan. Yeah, that's the story with Kenobi. So it still is coming back to it, right?
Oh yeah,
That story is about him turning back to the light and being a Jedi in the dark times, just like how Ahsoka, she becomes Fulcrum. She becomes this agent, really helping the Nation Rebellion find its footing.
it,
And so that's kind of where how they continue to carry it forward.
it's interesting. I think that is like, I think any story where a Jedi is our main point of view, main character,
Mhm.
the thematic parallel is start in this place of trauma, then they slowly become a Jedi again.
Mhm.
Well, for acting out, it's like they try to figure out what to do, and then by figuring that out, they slowly become a Jedi again, even in the context of their new lives.
Yeah.
With Cal, it's in the mines. With Kanan, I don't know where Kanan starts out in the book. It's like
Mhm.
in a bar. Maybe I'm getting Rob Coda from Force Unleashed, who also was in a bar
No,
drunk, and then he became
Kanan's in A New Dawn.
yeah, new done. So or even Barris, who probably fell and traumatized the hardest with being an
Mhm.
Inquisitor for a day, and then by the end, she's probably gotten full Jedi again, where
Mhm.
she's not even using her lightsaber. She's like kind of it's emerged, and of course, Ahsoka. She can say I'm no Jedi all she wants.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting, I think Ahsoka, you could argue, took longer to
Yeah.
to kind of get her groove back. If we don't consider her groove back, even by the time of the original trilogy, and her groove truly comes back
Yeah.
in the Ahsoka series. Um,
Episode 5 specifically. Yeah.
yeah, certainly, I think that's where it really kind of comes back, where she finally dealt with it. Although you could argue that she was getting over her trauma, and then more trauma hit when she found out what happened to her master, because she never did
Yeah.
find out until
Yeah.
Rebels. Um, so yeah, that's certainly the dark times
Yeah.
story, and even Yoda, I think kind of has his humbling with being
Mhm.
now on Dagobah, just needs to contemplate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
Just want to say one thing about with Kanan.
yeah, go ahead.
'Cause, and
Okay.
John Jackson Miller coming in hot here again. I think he's almost the archetypal story here, because
He's really good, so I like.
yeah. So the comic, interestingly, it's kind of in a bit of reverse order. The first arc is after Order 66, and when the first arc, the second arc goes back and it's before Order 66, and it's into Order 66. Caleb Doom, he starts off, he sheds his name. He sheds his, he becomes he's a Padawan. He becomes a scrappy kid who has to get by. Um, that then all the way uh into where we meet him at the beginning of A New Dawn. He's in the bar on that mining planet. Um, he's got his lightsaber in a canister in a holder thing, but he's not using it. It is similar to Cal in that way, in that uh, he's kind of he's cut himself off in hiding. I think with Kanan, uh, he's kind of on the edge, kind of morally on the edge. He just isn't. He's afraid to live up to his potential because he's on it. Well, basically, because he's on his own. This is a big point. I think this is a huge point here. You know, finding Hera Hera finding him is what brings him out of himself into the new dawn of being part of the rebellion, and um, you're part of this rebel cell, and her rebel cell, and the family that she ends up building, to the point where he can actually become the leader, become the person, the Jedi that uh, he always meant to be. The scene in Rebels where he gets knighted by the Grand Inquisitor, if you will.
Right.
Um, that he's unable to pass that on to Ezra, that leadership on to Ezra. I imagine he tells him these stories about how when I was your age, um, I was, in hiding, kind of like you were on Lothal. Uh, I was kind of the scrappy, kind of a, I don't know what the word is, but just not, you know, kind of a delinquent a little bit. Uh,
Pretty much.
yeah, because when you lose hope, you lose structure,
Mhm.
you lose any reason to follow the rules, and that's just the thing: is the Jedi, do they have reason to follow not the rules but the moral code, given what happened in Order 66, and given how the Force could feel like the Force let them down, and uh, Canon did that for a while, and that's what we see this transition in New Dawn. We see him, get in with the rough crowd in Canon in the comic, and of course in a New Dawn we see him emerge from that. So,
I also think. Sorry,
no,
I just thought
no,
of,
that was it. Go ahead.
I just thought about this because all these examples we've talked about: Kanan, Ahsoka, Cal,
Hmm.
are kind of the big three.
Yeah,
I think what's interesting about them compared to Obi-Wan is they're all Padawans.
yeah.
They were youngling Padawans. Ahsoka was a Padawan, still a child.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know how old she was by the time of episode 3. Probably 16.
Yeah, but more like 18, 19. So she's a bit older, but
Okay, yeah, 18, 19. So
still, she was never knighted.
never died. Age with Padawan, still young, not even technically legally an adult.
Always already still under the training of a master, right?
Yep.
Padawan.
Kanan, again, teenager, still a Padawan.
Mhm.
Cal, still a Padawan. And I think that's
Young kid.
interesting that a lot of the stories that these big stories in particular,
Mhm.
they're all Padawans, and yet I think it'd be interesting if, and yet I think the Jedi who put up the more harder fights are still the masters,
Mhm.
right? Like I mean, not everybody. Obviously, there's that Dune Wizard comic. I think he's probably older.
Yeah.
Um, but you do see some, but Jocasta knew she's still fighting because she's like in her probably 90s or 80s or 70s.
Mhm.
Because she's like, because she's not. So and I think in some ways that's also because these older masters have probably are better at handling in their trauma, the trauma of this, compared to the younglings who
Mhm.
they pretty much just lost their families, right? Like this is
Yeah.
like the equivalent of losing your parents, right? Your master dying in front of you is the equivalent of your parents dying in front of you. It's
Mhm.
not good. While the other masters probably handled it better. I don't know. There was East Cost who kind of became a priest and
Oh yeah.
hightail hightail. So it's not everybody, but it does seem like the older Jedi probably
Mhm.
handled it a little bit better, and that's why they were more fighting, with the exception, of course, of Obi-Wan, but that's because
Yeah.
he got a more personal connection to the
True.
trauma. So I think that's an interesting connection,
Yeah.
thematic thing going on.
That's true. Obi-Wan, yeah, a more personal failure on his part. Yeah, East Coast, I don't know. I think he handled it pretty well. He came out all right. Uh, pretty serenely until Vader catches up to him, of course.
Yeah.
Um, and then Jocasta, yeah, they're older. They just have a longer sense of history.
Mhm.
Um, they've lived long. They had a longer life before the Empire than during the Empire, and
I mean,
so
Yoda.
yeah, especially Yoda. Um, I mean Yoda also reflecting on the personal failure. But Jocasta, she's just there. She's just more integrated, incorporated into her identity.
I'd
And
be
we
curious.
don't see much. Like we only see the only thing we see of her is in Attack of the Clones. Oh, something must not Kamina must not be there. But that's kind of a meme at this point, that I mean the way Charles Soule writes her in Vader comics. She's formidable. And like you're saying, able to put up a fight. Think about Heath Koth, the way he's able to move forward. Cordova still kicking, believe it or not, in Survivor. I was surprised. I thought he was gone. I thought he was dead. and what's her name in Fallen Order and Survivor?
I know what you're thinking about, but she was also a Padawan too.
She
So
was a Padawan. Yeah.
no, she was a
But
knight. She was a
no,
knight.
yeah, Inno's Padawan, who is also a knight at this point. Um,
That's right.
yeah, Seer Jinda, of course. Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if it's a more interesting story then to track, kind of like High Republic, a more interesting story to track younger people in crisis,
Oh,
and maybe a more relatable thing, well,
yeah,
just because it's more uncertain how they handle this and different options, and coming of age, how they handle this. I mean, even a guy named Luke Skywalker, we see him come of age
yeah,
with
yeah.
Jedi during the Empire,
Oh yeah,
these films
like
by George Lucas. But I think what's interesting, again, think about the real world context of it, is, um, it's speaking to, I think, millennial and Gen Z angst about the world. Trying to be heroic, trying to do the right thing in a world where rent is how high it is, and cost of living, and uh, you know, the insurance companies are denying pre-existing conditions and all that, and just people are very stuck in the kind of the situations that they're in, even though the solutions are right in front of us. Global warming, right? We could, a lot of eco anxiety and just fears about how our planet is unsustainable, and investment in R&D for hybrid, and just pushing those on the road, or just better public transit. All these issues that conspire, you know trying to make a living off minimum wage, and all these things that a lot of younger people feel are anxious about. Home ownership, uh, raising a family, finding someone at all. It just, all these things. I think that's partly why we have these stories of younger characters like Ezra, for example, like Ahsoka and Ezra and Omega, um, and of course, Kanan and Cal, and uh, the characters we encounter. And there aren't too many Dark Times young stories in paper canon just yet, but maybe that's changing. Um, yeah, speaking to the sense of what's it like to be, uh, the anxiety of living, of being someone who kind of counter to the prevailing authority. It is more radical in that sense, in a slightly subtle way.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to see like, although probably they're all dead because they're all council members. Like, what's Oppo Rancisis, who was probably hundreds of years old. How's he handling? Maybe how would have he handled this? Because he's old.
Yeah.
Although I get that's the point. I get. I mean, to be fair, I think that was part of the Emperor's plan was take out the council members and a lot of the senior members of the
Yeah.
Jedi because they're going to be the leaders of any kind of retaliation. So once Order 66 is more or less done, all you got left is stragglers and Padawans. And it ain't that much of a threat. So
Right. He underestimates them. His overconfidence is his weakness.
that's true. Although I wonder what Quinlan what is up to. Like how is he handling this? Like is he fighting or is he in hiding?
Where is Quinlan?
Where is Quinlan?
Need Quinlan's story.
I hope we do. Maybe we'll get one soon.
Yeah.
But let's move. Okay, we're kind of running. We're kind of ending near the end here. Let's kind of move on, I guess, to like the sequel era, which I'll just count as also Mando. And sadly, there aren't a lot of books in this stuff that are Jedi related. Sadly, hopefully soon one day. Although the comics maybe, but with Luke in particular, we now have the generation removed from the original order, right? Like we're almost one step away. Luke is kind of the last vestiges, I get. In my opinion, this is my hot take. Legends did it differently because I think Legends had a very different perspective and obviously how it would have been made. But in my opinion, Luke to me is the last vestige. Like he is the transition point of the old order and what hopefully will be the new order with Rey. Like I think the Jedi Order of Dawn to Luke, so that's like 25,000 years is one epoch, and it's a very long epoch.
Interesting.
And then Rey is a true cutoff point to something maybe brand new, with almost like little to no continuity towards it. Because Luke is like he's got that legacy because he's got connections to Obi-Wan. He got the connection to Yoda, obviously. So he's like got a little bit of that old Jedi Order thing going on. Clearly was going with that. If Mando's got anything to go with it, and even Shadows of the Sith.
Yeah.
And then eventually Rey, yeah, she was trained by Luke for like a day, and Leia was trained by Luke, but Leia's always kind of got more of a kind of a different way of doing things. And in some ways, Rey's kind of going on this on her own. So she's like,
Yeah.
I mean, again,
Got
we
the
don't know.
books.
She got the books, so she got at least a little bit of reference, but she's probably going to have to do a lot of her own thing as well. But to go back to Shadows of the Sith, to kind of stay on the point topic, that book goes a little bit into the Jedi Order in terms of like what Luke's trying to do. I don't remember it going like that deep into like the Jedi legacy too much or what a
No.
Jedi Order means. It's been a while since I don't.
Yeah.
It's more just a hunt story. But it tips on that a little bit and also kind of shows, Luke being a little distant with Ben, even though it's like, should I do this? I don't know, but that's how the old Jedi did it. Although I don't know if that's like looking at the Order, more just kind of looking at Luke like trying to balance his legacy with the fact that this is his nephew and family. So, again, this is kind of an era that's sort of in terms of depicting the Jedi, not much, which is why I would say this to the end.
Sure. I mean, but it's still a question of what the Jedi are and could be,
Right?
and that's why I brought it up a little bit. That Luke is involved in the response to this growing darkness in the Sith, and Luke never. I don't think Luke ever gets to Exegol, but we see Exegol in a story that has Luke in it.
Right.
That the darkness rises and the light to meet it. Right? Skywalker, I assume, but no Rey. So to your point, yeah, I mean there's definitely, again, all she has there isn't the lineage anymore. There isn't the apostolic succession. She has to teach herself effectively. Again, she's got a little bit with with Luke, a little bit with Leia. Who knows what Force ghosts how they're going to be involved? But even then, I mean, the same with Yoda, with Luke, with Yoda and Ben, but Obi-Wan, but it's not much, right? There's still a lot more with Yoda and Luke. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll definitely see in this next year of comics.
Oh yeah, I hope so. I'm so excited for that. But unless you got anything else to say, I kind of feel like we've said all that there is to say. I think as we said before, it's all about the context of which these stories are written to some degree, and what the artists themselves believe. I think that will ultimately be what makes a Jedi story a Jedi story.
And and that really kind of accounts for the changes, of era and of like you're saying, when is a good time to tell what story. So, definitely, good conversation. We could do full episodes on each of these eras, I think, and we probably have, and we probably will, in each of these. But yeah, it's you have a good time for now to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Comments. A lot of comments for Brandon about Outlaws, which we won't get to because we're talking about Outlaws. We talked about it for a bit at the top. Glad to be back. Glad to be here at Ion Canon. Definitely happy to continue Tractor Beam, continuing that going strong, but glad to be in this the in-depth discussion on the lore of the Galaxy Far, Far Away. This kind of conversation. So yeah, please, everyone, do let us know what you thought of our conversation tonight. You can comment below. Those comment boxes aren't going anywhere, so check them out on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitch, not Twitter. I don't know why we bother with that. It's still not working. That's okay. No more bots. But yeah, thanks everyone for already giving this episode a like, and the channel subscription. Please do so if you haven't already. Yeah, and then you'll get Tractor Beam on Monday or Wednesday rather. You'll get the flagship on Thursday, and of course check out the whole network. Star Wars Underworld, the Race Side, and Tales from Beyond the Galaxy as well. Joel, it was another great discussion again. Great to be back. Thanks for guiding us all through. We're still going. It's like riding a bike, just a month. Going back into the saddle here. Where can they find you on the internet?
Find me at JID2021. Get JID2021 on Twitter. Of course, every now and then I will post a little bit on the Ion Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. And of course, you can follow me on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. So check me out there as well.
There we go. And you can follow me on Instagram and Threads at MNAUG1138. I got a bit of a selfie, including some facial hair. There we go. Food, if you like food, in your Instagram, at beaches.foodie, FOODIE. Check that out. You get some content. Oh, you got to post something today. I forgot about that. I'll get to that in a bit. And Twitter, NEUG485. Tweeting about a whole bunch of stuff there. And of course, at Iron Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD, and at the SWU this Wednesday, Tractor Beam Comics Reviews. Chris and I are talking about Kalnaka, Hieroglyphic Echoes of Fear, and Crash and Burn. Please do join us this Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. But yeah, that's all does it for Ion Canon. Next week, I'm back. I'm not going anywhere. We're doing more comics next week. Also, should mention we're going to talk about the Tales of Battle of Jakku news, more news that came out about the covers and whatnot, which we'll also talk about on Monday, because on Monday we were talking about top 5 comics moments so far. I'm guessing I'll stick to canon mostly. I don't know if you will necessarily.
Oh no, that's my plan.
Oh, your plan is to stick to canon. All right, so I'll stick to canon too. Top 5 canon comics moments right here on the Iron King. We haven't really done that much at all, like a listicle kind of thing like that. So that'll be fun. That'll be a nice way of getting back in the saddle. Of course, I'm back in the saddle, but nice way of keeping things going here at the Iron Canon podcast. So yeah, until then, let's blow this thing and head home.